Hello. Today, I want to share with you what happened when I decided to see if it's possible for us to use our consciousness in an expanded state and connect with a famous figure who has passed. Now, we can do that just for fun, but the best results happen, as I learned in the past, when our intention comes from the heart and our motive is to serve. So I'm taking you back now to February. Let me see my notes. 2011, a long time ago. I was very new on the path of mediumship. I was a retired Navy commander. I had served as aide to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but I was receiving verifiable evidence when I sat with people that I was consciously connecting in real time, two-way conversations with their loved ones who had passed. So why couldn't I wondered, connect with any famous person across the veil as long as it served the greater good? So I sat down and I wondered, well, who would serve the greatest good? And at that time on my journey of awakening, I was reading a lot about quantum physics to try to understand how this connection that I had established with non-physical consciousness was possible. It was very real, but I didn't understand it. And I was a liberal arts major, a foreign language major. So studying quantum physics was a brand new thing for me. But what I was learning, the basics, I couldn't dive in too deep or my brain would have exploded, was showing me that this world is not as solid as it seems. And I had that personal experience already of knowing that consciousness survives death, that we are far more than these bodies. And the one person who kept coming up over and over in books that I was reading was Albert Einstein. And another reason I wanted to connect with him, to learn directly from him, was because it turns out that I read a lot of quotes by Dr. Einstein that showed he had a very deep understanding of spirituality. Some of his quotes are deeply spiritual. He honored the mystery of life. So rather than just doing this to puff up my ego and say, hey, I connected with Cleopatra or whatever, I wanted to see if I could get evidence by connecting with him, if he would come to me at all, and what he could teach me that I could share with others. So I remember when I did this experiment, I was actually on a sailboat. It was a different boat than the one we crossed the Atlantic in. I can remember lying in the aft cabin. I waited till my husband was not around so I wouldn't be disturbed. And I used my regular Bless Me method that I have free on my website and on YouTube, a 7-step process for connecting with higher consciousness. I went through those steps to move beyond identification with the story of Suzanne and just tap into soul awareness. And when I got to the point where I had surrendered the story and shifted to that expanded state, I said, Albert Einstein, if it serves the greater good, please step into awareness now and tell me things about you I couldn't possibly know. And then I waited a moment and I felt that lightheadedness that I feel in a regular reading when others' loved ones light up my field with their presence. It's this lightheaded, almost dizzy feeling that I can't bring on by itself. And I felt the presence. And I welcomed him, trusting that because I'd asked for Albert Einstein, this was him. Now, to this day, I don't see the spirits' faces, so I have to sense personality. So I said, if this is you, let me feel what you were like when you were here in a body. And I was surprised to feel a bit of shyness, reclusiveness. He felt very reserved. But then I heard him say, I had a strange sense of humor. Some found it odd. Words to that effect. I wrote down everything that I sensed in that session, and I have some pages here with me from that very session, but I don't want to be reading my notes. But I remember him talking about his sense of humor, and we'll flash some pictures up here that I found online later to, of course, validate this one picture that most of us have seen of Einstein acting silly. But a later search online showed that, yes, he was a bit reserved and shy and reclusive. So I could feel a personality distinct from my own. So then I went on to ask him questions. I had a list in my mind, and I remember asking him, why did you come to America? because I knew that he lived here in the later years of his life. There were certain things that I knew, but he had to tell me things I didn't know. And he said, let me see if I can find it. I came to America for academic freedom and intellectual stimulation. Well, again, later, an online Google search showed that that was absolutely free. He wanted to escape the tyranny in Germany in 1933. He absolutely came for that stated reason. One could intuit that, so I didn't end there. I kept asking him questions. For example, I said to him, "What were you wearing in the Time magazine cover?" Because I was aware from some of my reading that he'd been on Time magazine. And he said, "See the one where I was wearing a dark suit, a white shirt, and a thin dark tie." Well, this one was really great because later, when I Googled every one of these items that I sensed in this session, it turns out there were many times that Einstein ended up on the cover of Time magazine. But I zeroed in because he said, "See the one of him wearing exactly that." It was just his portrait on the cover of the magazine in a dark suit, a white shirt, and a thin dark tie. But what was amusing about the fact that he was wearing exactly that, it's no wonder he pointed me to that issue, because the title on that cover said, "Rediscovering Einstein." And that was exactly what I was doing, rediscovering him now, here amongst us, actively interacting with me from non-physical form. So that was really cool. Let's see. He said to me at that point, I said, "What do you have to share with me that I can share with others?" And I wrote it down as I sensed it. He said, "General relativity was my shining star, but I didn't go far enough." And anybody that studied Einstein since that, of course, would know that. But he said, "Use your imagination and vision the impossible and make it possible." And that was exactly what I was doing in that session. I was imagining that it was possible to connect with him, and I was having a two-way conversation. Now, some people may still say I was making that up, but when we connect with those across the veil, there is a sense of presence that you can't prove to anyone. You know it through the experience. I felt it within my very being. I knew I was not making up this conversation. He then told me more about his life in response to my question. He said there were periods of little to no money, of penury, which I found interesting because it's not a term that I would use. One really specific thing about this interaction that interested me was that I heard his voice with a German accent. And usually, if I haven't met the person that I connect with in my sessions, the words they say sound like my own thoughts. So it was intriguing to me that he would have a German accent when he came through. Now, he said the penury created problems with my wife. And when I looked online later, I found out that sure enough, he had a strained relationship. And it was very interesting that he did go through hard times working in a patent office. That was something I did know about him, the patent office, but I didn't know how tight money was for him. Then he flashed in my mind's eye a very unusual image. It was him riding on top of a red rocket. And I said, "What is that all about?" And he said, "I would have loved space travel. Time machines fascinated me." And I loved when I heard this bit of information from him, because this was something I had never read about him. And he gave me the knowing when he showed me this cartoon-like image of him riding a red rocket, that I would be able to find that image online. I have the goosebumps just as I share this with you, because this kind of validation really fuels me. It's the kind of thing that shows me I'm not making this up. And then he said, "I enjoyed the intellectual stimulation of taking a thought and riding it like a rocket, to dream of possibilities and give life to thoughts." Now, that's a cool thought right there. And it shows the way he thought. And it also went especially with that image of him riding a red rocket. So what's really cool is afterwards, I Googled and found out that he really was interested in time travel and time machines. And so I did a Google image search for Einstein and red rocket. I couldn't find anything. I was disappointed. I tried it from every angle. nothing, but I could still see that image in my mind's eye, something that I had never seen before. And I tuned in and I heard, go back and look it up in a different way. So I did time machines, Albert Einstein, and suddenly I realized it doesn't necessarily have to have been a photo. And I went on YouTube and Googled time machines and Einstein, and up came an image that we're going to put on the screen for you here. Look at this image. It was exactly what he had flashed in my mind's eye when I asked to speak to Albert Einstein and he was talking about his interest, time travel. So this to me was a beautiful validation. I didn't really need these validations because I could feel him so clearly, but I absolutely loved that. Okay. I will share with you the rest of that phrase that he shared with me about using your imagination and harnessing consciousness at the end. But I want to give you a couple follow-up stories to the benefit that I personally derived from connecting with Albert Einstein. I was later introduced to the work of Dr. Gary Schwartz, a researcher from the University of Arizona in the afterlife. He has multiple degrees, has from Harvard, taught at Yale, and I read several of his books about mediumship, and he brought up Albert Einstein several times. I felt a nudge from my guides to reach out to Dr. Schwartz and tell him that I had had a clear, meaningful connection with Albert Einstein. That was how I was first introduced to Dr. Gary Schwartz and ended up working with him over the years. We remain friends to this day. But I wanted to share with you specifically about a time when I was sitting in Dr. Schwartz's Laboratory for Advancements in Human Consciousness at the university. Dr. Schwartz was sitting at his desk. His wife, Rhonda, was sitting over in the corner of the office. Rhonda is a medium who works with Dr. Schwartz, with Gary, in his work in connecting more clearly across the veil. Dr. Schwartz is working on a soul phone, not a cell phone, but technology to harness this consciousness of those who have passed in a way that right now we can only do through our own energy fields. So I was sitting in his office. We were having a conversation about the afterlife. And it was a real moment for me when I looked across the room. And just like you can see the chair behind me, there was an empty chair across the room. Except, very unusual for me, I became aware of a spirit in that chair. I could not see the figure clearly, but I knew in my mind's eye that was Albert Einstein sitting right there. Now, Dr. Schwartz, Rhonda Schwartz had been working together with famous people across the veil, and I knew that Albert Einstein was one of them. The evidence was overwhelming. I'd brought him through in experiments in his laboratory in the past. To sense him there was not surprising that he would be there, but that I could sense him truly surprised me. Now, Rhonda Schwartz sees those in spirits. I only feel them. So not giving anything away, but wanting to validate what I was sensing, I turned and I said, Rhonda, do you see who's sitting in that chair? And very matter-of-factly, Rhonda said, yeah, it's Albert. He's been here the whole time. It didn't even surprise her, but I was stunned that I sensed him in that moment and that he's just hanging out, listening to this conversation. But why wouldn't he? It's of interest to him. He wants to further the awakening of humanity through this work. But always one that wants evidence. I silently said, Albert Einstein, I would like evidence that this is you. Tell me something I couldn't possibly know. And in my mind's eye, I saw his arm point to just where Rhonda was sitting, and he said silently, do you see that blue sombrero on the wall above her? They bought that in Tombstone, Arizona. So I looked at Rhonda. She's not aware of this conversation I'm having with him. And I said, Rhonda, where did you get that sombrero that's on the wall? And she looked up at it and she said, oh, Gary and I bought it at a great little outdoor market in Tombstone, Arizona. Did you get the goosebumps like I did? What I gained personally from that interaction back in 2011, when I had the curiosity and the playfulness to move beyond my left brain that says this is impossible or I could look silly, and just see if it served the greater good, if I could connect with someone famous, was number one, yes, we can. But number two, from that session, my guide said to me, do you see how interactive your conversation was with him? Because at that point, I had been a medium for a couple of years only. And I was simply discerning information that was verifiable from the spirits of the clients who I was giving readings to. But it wasn't interactive. And my conversation in real time with Albert Einstein, with his German accent and everything, and his playfulness of showing me himself riding on a rocket and talking about the benefit of using imagination, showed me converse with these loved ones in spirit who you're bringing through. They're right here. They still exist. This is real time, interactive, often very humorous, and always very touching and emotional people who want to let us know they're still right here. So I want to close this session by reading to you the rest of the quote that came from Albert Einstein when he encouraged all of us to use our imagination. He said, consciousness creates matter. It is true. Thought is an energy. It coalesces subatomic matter, directing particles, just like the butterfly flew in response to mental guidance when your stepdaughter brought you a butterfly on the trail in response to your request that she make her presence known. Subatomic particles organize themselves in response to directed consciousness. I love that. Take it for what it's worth. What has arisen in your curiosity? What questions would you like to ask of the universe? Ask that the perfect person in spirit who has the answers you seek, whether that be your loved ones who have passed, whether that be your guides who know everything about you, or whether that be a famous person who shares your passion in this lifetime, to come to you and make their presence known through feelings, through visuals, through words, through the direct knowing. This is real. You are so much more than the physical body, and we are all deeply connected.